Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. In today's compilation video, we will revisit 6 shocking tragedies that struck Vietnamese communities overseas, from the United States to Australia. These cases stunned the public not only because of their brutality, but also because of the unexpected identities of the perpetrators. There were unfinished dreams of talented female graduate researchers at prestigious universities, and families destroyed by the very husbands and siblings they lived with. Whether the motive stemmed from financial disputes, personal selfishness, or ruthless gang revenge plots, each story leaves behind immeasurable pain and powerful lessons of vigilance for all of us. Join us as we reopen these complex case files to uncover the truth behind the tragic deaths of those living far from their homeland. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese case files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. At around 10:30 p.m. on the 17th of April 2025, Australia's emergency hotline 000 received a distress call reporting a violent home invasion and abduction at a residence on Greenacre Road, Bankstown. The caller was a 15-year-old boy. In a state of panic, he told operators that his mother had just been attacked and taken away by a group of armed men. Neighbors also reported hearing loud screams coming from the house moments earlier. When police arrived, they found the 15-year-old in shock and his 8-year-old sibling unconscious with a head injury. The house showed clear signs of forced entry. Paramedics immediately transported both children to the hospital. The 8-year-old had suffered a serious head trauma and required emergency surgery, reportedly the result of being struck with a baseball bat. Meanwhile, their 5-year-old mother was still missing. Just over an hour later, around 11:30 p.m., a resident in Beverly Hills, about 8 kilometers from Bankstown, reported a suspicious car fire at the end of Welfare Avenue near a park and a major roadway. Firefighters arrived and extinguished the intense blaze, consuming a black SUV. When the fire was finally under control, they discovered human remains in the back seat. Several firefighters later admitted the scene stayed with them for a long time. Police immediately sealed off the area. Although visual identification was impossible, investigators strongly suspected that the remains belonged to the woman abducted in Bankstown just an hour earlier. Standing before a burnt vehicle and unidentified remains, detectives realized they were now dealing with a particularly serious case, one that appeared meticulously planned and chillingly deliberate. That night, police immediately began their preliminary investigation. At the Bankstown residence, they found a chaotic and disturbing scene. The front door had been forced open, with shattered glass scattered across the floor. The living room showed signs of violence. Dark stains later confirmed to be from the 8-year-old boy's head injury were visible, and evidence of a struggle appeared throughout the home. Overturned chairs and scattered belongings indicated that the victim had been taken away brutally. Investigators were shaken as they surveyed the scene. They could only imagine the terror the children experienced as they witnessed their mother being overpowered and taken away. The level of cruelty far exceeded what officers typically encountered. From the 15-year-old statement, police learned that 4 or 5 intruders, dressed in black, wearing masks, and armed with handguns and batons, had stormed into their home. The group assaulted the younger boy with a baseball bat, threatened the older boy at gunpoint, and then attacked their mother. After incapacitating the 4 or 5-year-old woman, the offenders forcibly removed parts of her clothing, an act that left the 15-year-old frozen in shock. They then dragged the woman outside and pushed her into the back seat of a dark SUV waiting at the curb before speeding away into the night. These details alarmed Bankstown detectives as they revealed a high degree of planning and an extreme willingness to harm both a woman and her children. Meanwhile, at the scene of the burned vehicle in Beverly Hills, forensic teams faced immense challenges. The SUV had been almost completely destroyed by fire, its frame twisted by the extreme heat. The remains inside were severely damaged, preventing visual identification. Forensic technicians had to work meticulously to collect any usable evidence. They also found partially burned pieces of clothing on the ground nearby, believed to belong to the victim prior to the fire. A preliminary assessment suggested the victim may have been harmed by a firearm before the vehicle was set alight. Police noted that the blaze occurred in a secluded dead-end street near a park and only a few scattered homes. A local resident said their neighborhood had always been quiet, and they were horrified by the scene. This indicated that the perpetrator had deliberately chosen an isolated area to conceal the crime and destroy evidence. The early findings from both scenes led investigators to a preliminary conclusion. This was a calculated, targeted attack, not a random burglary or spontaneous violence. The victim had been taken from her own home, a place where she should have been safest. The fact that the victim was stripped of clothing and the vehicle set on fire suggested an intent to degrade her and eliminate all evidence. Investigators understood they were dealing with offenders who were ruthless, highly organized, and extremely dangerous. That same night, a task force named Strike Force Bushfield was established, bringing together top detectives from the New South Wales Homicide Squad and local police. Their highest priority was to uncover the mastermind behind this shocking crime. And although investigators strongly suspected the remains belonged to the woman abducted from Bankstown, they proceeded carefully, gathering scientific evidence to confirm her identity. If confirmed, the victim in both incidents would indeed be Kim Thi Tran, 45, mother of the two boys aged 8 and 15. DNA samples were quickly taken from the two children and fingerprints from personal items in the home to compare with evidence recovered from the remains. However, due to the severe damage, extracting DNA was extremely challenging. Police authorized a full forensic autopsy to determine the cause of death and assist with accurate identification. While awaiting the final forensic results, investigators shifted their focus to gathering background information about the missing woman. Through neighbors and friends, they learned that this Vietnamese woman lived quietly, was kind-hearted, and had never been involved in conflicts with anyone. However, one detail stood out. Her husband, Tung Nguyen, 45, was currently away. According to relatives, he had flown to Queensland for work and was not in Sydney at the time of the incident. Police immediately contacted him. Upon hearing the news, he rushed aboard the earliest flight back to Sydney to identify his wife and take care of the children. As the investigation deepened, officers encountered another challenge. Kim Thi Tran had almost no extended family in Australia. She had immigrated more than 10 years earlier, so aside from her husband and children, she had no close relatives in the country. This made it extremely difficult for police to notify next of kin and gather information about her relationships and personal history. At the same time, a crucial lead emerged from a neighbor's security camera. The footage captured the moment a group of abductors forced a woman into a vehicle. Although the images were blurry and the faces were unclear, it confirmed the 5-year-old boy's account. A white sedan and a dark SUV had appeared in front of the, quote, home at the time of the incident. This gave police grounds to review traffic cameras along the roughly 8-kilometer route from Bankstown to Beverly Hills in search of the vehicle's trail. A vast network of public and private security cameras was examined. Grainy, late-night images of two vehicles speeding along major roads were pieced together, guiding investigators along their route. Police also appealed to the public for any information about suspicious activity on the night of April 17th. Several residents responded. One reported hearing a car engine rev loudly near the victim's home around 10:30 p.m. Another saw smoke rising in Beverly Hills at approximately 11:30 p.m. Though none had seen the offenders' faces, their reports helped strengthen the sequence of events. Putting all clues together, investigators formed a preliminary timeline. The offenders arrived at the victim's home around 10:30 p.m., carried out the attack quickly, transported her to Beverly Hills, carried out the fatal act around 11:30 p.m., set the vehicle on fire, and fled just before residents noticed the blaze. Crucially, cameras showed the white sedan on Canterbury Road at about 10:45 p.m., traveling in the same direction as a dark SUV several hundred meters behind, suggesting the two vehicles were moving together. Near Beverly Hills, a private camera captured them turning into Welfare Avenue within minutes of each other. About 15 minutes later, another camera recorded the white sedan driving back out alone. This led to a major hypothesis. The group transported the victim to this isolated location, carried out their attack, set the SUV on fire, then all left together in the sedan, abandoning the burned vehicle behind. The sedan later disappeared along the highway heading south, possibly continuing toward Melbourne that same night. Tracking this sedan proved difficult because it was using false license plates. Around this time, the victim's husband had already returned. During his interview with police, he appeared devastated. When brought in for identification, he tearfully recognized personal features of his wife and a charred piece of her gold necklace found near the remains. More importantly, when pressed with the question, "Who might want to harm your family?" he hesitated, then revealed a chilling secret. He had once been involved with a criminal drug manufacturing network. He admitted that he frequently traveled between Sydney and Melbourne for business with a group of Vietnamese offenders tied to a large synthetic drug operation. Recently, however, a serious conflict had erupted between him and the group after a large shipment mysteriously went missing. He suspected they believed he had taken it or that someone had diverted the shipment, costing them millions of dollars, leading to retaliation. Upon hearing this, investigators immediately developed a new working theory. The motive for this crime likely stemmed from an internal dispute within the drug trafficking world, and the innocent woman had become a tragic pawn in their conflict. On the 22nd of April 2025, the final forensic report confirmed the husband's account. DNA extracted from the victim's teeth matched the DNA profiles of her 2 children. With this, police formally concluded that the victim was Kim Thi Tran, 45. Her identity was officially confirmed, closing the search for the name behind the tragedy, yet simultaneously opening a long and challenging road ahead to track down those responsible for this horrific act. Alongside the identification process, investigators urgently continued gathering physical evidence. At the victim's home, the forensics team searched for any traces the offenders might have left behind, such as fingerprints or shoe prints. Unfortunately, the attackers had worn gloves and covered their faces, operating with a level of professionalism that left almost no usable prints or identifying images. Even so, police did recover a piece of black tape near the entrance, possibly used to restrain the victim and later discarded. The tape was sent for laboratory testing to look for DNA or trace sweat belonging to the perpetrator. Meanwhile, at the burned SUV site, specialists attempted to collect whatever remained. The vehicle's metal license plates had been removed, suggesting a deliberate attempt to erase registration records. However, the VIN on the engine block was still visible. A rapid database check revealed the SUV had been registered in Victoria, but the listed owner was a shell company, indicating that the vehicle was likely used by the criminal group and then abandoned. In addition, bullet fragments found inside the SUV were sent for ballistic examination to determine the type of firearm used. Results showed they came from a .22 caliber handgun, a model commonly used among criminal groups. Another angle of the investigation focused on phone records. During questioning, Tung Nguyen provided investigators with a disturbing lead. Just before Kim Thi Tran was killed, his phone received a series of threatening countdown messages, 20 minutes left, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, resembling a ticking clock. However, because he was away on a work trip at the time and his phone was either out of service or turned off, he did not see the messages until much later. His lack of response may have angered the kidnappers and pushed them toward a more violent outcome. At the same time, the ransom-like nature of those messages suggested that the criminals initially intended to negotiate. It is highly likely that they demanded a substantial payment. When their ultimatum went unanswered, they chose to carry out their threats in the harshest way. When all these clues were pieced together, investigators saw a clearer portrait of the offenders, an organized group with planning, coordination, and an interstate network. As a result, New South Wales Police worked with Victoria Police to expand the investigation, sharing intelligence on the synthetic drug network the husband had been involved with. As expected, Victoria Police confirmed they were also monitoring a Vietnamese criminal group suspected of running a large-scale methamphetamine operation. In fact, on the 19th of April 2025, just 2 days after the murder, Victoria Police raided a remote farm in Spring Dala, west of Ballarat, believed to be one of the group's drug manufacturing sites. There, officers seized chemicals and equipment consistent with synthetic drug production, reinforcing evidence of a wider criminal network. However, no suspects were arrested, as the group appeared to have fled before the raid. Even so, the discovery confirmed that the syndicate behind this operation had interstate reach and operated with high sophistication. At this point, investigators refocused on the victim's husband's connections within the drug network. Using his statements, they identified individuals he had recently worked with. One name quickly stood out: An Nguyen, a 29-year-old Vietnamese man living in Bankstown. Intelligence indicated he acted as a link between the Victoria-based drug group and several associates in Sydney, making him a critical bridge in the supply chain. He had previously appeared in federal drug-related intelligence files, though he had no formal criminal convictions. His residence being in Bankstown, only a short distance from the victim's home, further heightened suspicion. Police questioned whether he might have used his local familiarity to orchestrate the retaliation against his associate's family. Investigators began covert surveillance on Tran Nguyen. Administrative records showed he rented a modest apartment in Bankstown, lived alone, and had no clear occupation. In the weeks following the murder, Nguyen remained in Sydney rather than fleeing, lived quietly, and appeared to be lying low, as though detached from the chaos unfolding outside. Police secretly collected his phone data, call logs, messages, and location history from the night of April 17th. Analysis revealed that on the night of the crime, Nguyen's phone was active in the Bankstown area and powered off around 10 p.m., only switching on again hours later at another location. This raised alarm bells, as the timing aligned exactly with the abduction. Investigators suspected he turned off his phone to avoid location tracking during the crime. Financial tracing also showed that right after April 17th, Nguyen received a large deposit into his bank account, which he promptly withdrew in cash. This could have been payment or operational funding for the attack. With mounting evidence, New South Wales police decided to move in. At 5 a.m. on the 28th of August 2025, more than 4 months after the murder, the Raptor Squad and the Homicide Squad raided Nguyen's apartment in Bankstown. Nguyen was arrested on the spot while still asleep, leaving him no chance to resist. Police quickly seized his phone, computer, and several documents for examination. At the Bankstown police station, Tran Nguyen was intensively interrogated. As expected from an experienced offender, he invoked his right to remain silent and denied all involvement. However, police had gathered sufficient evidence to press charges. On the afternoon of the 28th of August 2025, he was formally charged with murder and intentionally causing serious injury related to the attack on the 8-year-old boy. Police announced to the media that Nguyen was the one who orchestrated the abduction and the killing of Kim Thi Tran, even if he was not the person who pulled the trigger. Despite arresting a key suspect, the investigation was far from over. New South Wales police believe Nguyen did not act alone. They suspected he had hired 3 gunmen to help carry out the kidnapping and killing. Those 3 men, the ones who directly carried out the shooting, were still at large. Police vowed to track them down and were coordinating with federal agencies to uncover the criminal organization behind the attack. The case had now entered a new phase, expanding from a single homicide into a broader investigation targeting a mafia-style syndicate and a far-reaching criminal network operating across Australia. This raises an important question. Who exactly is Tran Nguyen, and did he truly orchestrate the attack on Mrs. Kim and her 2 children as a form of punishment? According to investigators, Tran Nguyen, 29, is an Australian citizen of Vietnamese descent. Born and raised in Sydney's Vietnamese community, he was no stranger to the criminal underworld and was believed to be a key link within a drug trafficking syndicate based in Victoria. Despite being only 29, Nguyen had already entered the interstate methamphetamine trade and risen as an ambitious young figure. Senior members of the network entrusted him with transporting product between Melbourne and Sydney, as well as handling internal disputes within the organization. In other words, Tran Nguyen acted as Sydney-based coordinator while also serving as an enforcer when necessary to protect the syndicate's interests. Yet before his arrest, he had never been convicted of a major offense, allowing him to remain largely invisible to law enforcement despite his deep involvement. Nguyen's relationship with the victim emerged through her husband. Nguyen was described as a close business associate of Kim Thi Tran's spouse. That connection may explain why, when the criminal group's shipment went missing, Nguyen immediately suspected the victim's husband of betrayal or negligence. Acting either on orders or on his own decision, Nguyen allegedly sought to send a message by targeting the man's family, both as retaliation and as pressure to recover the missing product. His actions revealed a level of cold calculation that shocked the public. Nguyen did not carry out the attack himself. Instead, he stayed behind the scenes, directing others to execute the most brutal parts of the plan. This level of emotional detachment drew outrage, rivaling that directed at those who physically carried out the crime. Psychologically, Nguyen fit the profile of a high-functioning offender. He understood both street-level rules and legal risks, and deliberately tried to conceal his role. Rather than acting personally, he hired contract offenders and created an alibi. He even remained in Sydney afterward, likely believing the plan was flawless or wanting to show defiance toward law enforcement. In the end, however, even the sharpest cover can be torn apart, and he was brought into the light. After his arrest, Tran Nguyen was brought before the Bankstown local court on the 29th of August 2025. He did not apply for bail, an understandable decision given the severity of the charges. The magistrate denied bail and ordered him into remand ahead of trial. Outside the courtroom, defense lawyer Julie Nguyen stated that this was only the beginning of the legal process, and that her client intended to plead not guilty to all charges. However, subsequent developments drastically changed the direction of the investigation. By late October 2025, a major breakthrough occurred when UNSW police arrested 3 additional suspects described as a kill crew, aged 20, 21, and 32. They were accused of breaking into Mrs. Kim Thi Trun home, injuring the 8-year-old boy, abducting the victim, and transporting her in the SUV, later destroyed. All 3 were charged with murder, kidnapping, and participation in an organized criminal group. Their arrests expanded and restructured the entire case file, confirming that Tran Nguyen was not the sole perpetrator, but part of a much larger conspiracy. From this point, Nguyen's role became clearer. He was viewed as the coordinator who provided instructions and intelligence to the hit team rather than the direct assailant. This strengthened the conspiracy to murder charge, which, if proven deliberate, carries penalties similar to those for direct perpetrators. As of the 24th of November 2025, NSW police confirmed they were still pursuing the individual behind it all, the person believed to have ordered and financed the operation. That individual's identity has not been disclosed, but is suspected to be part of the Victoria-based criminal network. Investigators are also compiling additional evidence from cameras, digital devices, and encrypted communications. Meanwhile, Tran Nguyen remains in custody and is expected to appear in his next court hearing in early 2026. With the arrest of the 3 direct offenders, Nguyen's ability to shift blame onto unknown third parties has weakened significantly. Legal analysts believe that if the hit team confirms his role, Nguyen could face an exceptionally severe sentence, potentially comparable to life imprisonment. And if so, where is the true mastermind now? On Tuesday evening, the 17th of December, 2024, Milpitas police received a welfare check request at an apartment located in the Turing Apartments complex at 1355 McCandless Road. The call was made by relatives of the apartment's occupants, Vinh, Quang, Nguyen, and Betty Pham, after they had been unable to contact the couple for 3 consecutive days. What raised even greater concern was that both husband and wife failed to show up at their workplace, the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, on Monday at the start of the week without providing any explanation. This was highly unusual, as they had always been regarded as diligent and responsible employees. Their sudden absence, combined with the fact that they had previously maintained regular contact with family members, left their relatives deeply anxious and fearful that something was terribly wrong. When police arrived at the apartment, they rang the doorbell multiple times but received no response. Eventually, they were forced to use a key provided by the family to enter the residence. Flashlights swept through each room, and a disturbing scene gradually came into view. In the master bedroom, a woman was found lying motionless on the bed with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. In the smaller bedroom nearby, 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl, were discovered in a similar position. The apartment was filled with an oppressive, suffocating silence, lingering gunpowder in the air, and spent shell casings scattered across the floor. In the living room, a man was also found deceased. Notably, a 9mm handgun was placed directly on this person's right thigh. He had 2 gunshot wounds to the head, an unusual detail compared to the other 3 victims, each of whom had been struck by only 1 round. According to the initial assessment, all 4 victims had died several days before they were discovered, and their bodies were beginning to show early signs of mild decomposition. The scene showed no signs of ransacked belongings or evidence of a struggle. This suggested that everything likely happened very quickly, leaving the victims no time to react or flee. Based on forensic findings and confirmation from relatives, police identified the victims as the couple Vinh Quang Nguyen and Betty Pham, along with their 2 children. In parallel with confirming their identities, police also moved quickly to examine and analyze the scene. The 9mm semi-automatic handgun found beside the husband had a caliber consistent with the bullets recovered from the victims. Combining this detail with the position in which Vinh Quang Nguyen was found, investigators outlined a chilling scenario. This was likely a case in which a family member committed the killings and then took his own life. In other words, the number 1 suspect at that point was the husband, under the theory that he shot his wife and 2 children, then ended his own life with the same weapon. Even so, in the early stage, authorities remained extremely cautious. Police said they needed to thoroughly review all evidence before reaching a final conclusion, because they had never previously received any calls from this apartment related to domestic violence or family conflict. That detail made the case even more shocking and difficult for the community to comprehend. Clearly, the motive remained a major unanswered question, and the investigation therefore shifted its focus to the family's relationships, as well as the suspect's psychological state in the days leading up to the tragedy. Immediately after the case was discovered, the Milpitas Police Department coordinated with the Santa Clara County Medical Examiner's Office to conduct a thorough investigation, reconstructing the full sequence of events that led to the tragedy. First, autopsies were prioritized. Initial results showed that all 4 victims died from fatal gunshot wounds, consistent with what had been observed at the scene. The incident was estimated to have occurred over the previous weekend, most likely on Saturday night, the 14th of December, 2024. This assessment aligned with information from relatives who said they had lost contact with the family since that evening. This means the victims remained inside the apartment for about 3 days before being discovered on Tuesday night, the 17th of December. In parallel, evidence at the scene was examined meticulously. An inspection of the 9mm pistol recovered in the apartment showed it was a legally registered firearm under the name Vinh Nguyen, the husband in the family. In addition, police did not find any unfamiliar fingerprints or outside DNA, indicating there were no signs of forced entry from the outside. These details further reinforced investigators' initial assessment that the person responsible for the tragedy was most likely a member of the family. Next, police collected a laptop, mobile phones, and other electronic devices from the apartment to determine whether the suspect had left a suicide note or any other clues. However, during the initial review, authorities did not find any such letter. In the days that followed, police spoke with people who knew the family to understand what motive might have been behind the incident. Relatives of Vinh and Betty helped paint a clearer picture of the circumstances leading up to the tragedy, stating that the couple were in the process of filing for divorce and had quietly been living separately for some time. According to the family, Vinh Nguyen had recently shown signs of severe depression and frequent insomnia, especially after the marriage began to break down. Notably, not long before the incident, Vinh had purchased a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, the same firearm recovered at the scene. This information raised serious concern among investigators, prompting questions about whether the events had been planned in advance amid a state of deadlock and despair. Even so, police continued to cautiously consider every possibility. A review of records showed that this family had no prior history involving domestic violence or any legal violations in the area. Previously, Vinh Nguyen had never been contacted by police, nor had neighbors reported any unusual behavior. This meant the tragedy unfolded almost entirely without warning, with no clear red flags visible to those around them. Ultimately, based on all evidence collected, investigators concluded that Vinh Quang Nguyen was the perpetrator who shot his wife and 2 children, then took his own life inside the apartment. The investigation found no indication of outside involvement, and the case was closed as an internal family tragedy. On the 19th of December, 2024, the Milpitas Police Department held a press conference to announce its preliminary findings, affirming that this was an isolated case and emphasizing that there was no ongoing threat to the community. Although the identity of the person responsible had been established, the question of why behind the act continued to trouble even seasoned investigators. To better understand the psychological factors and circumstances behind the tragedy, police also worked to build a profile of the victims. According to the investigation, Betty Pham, whose full Vietnamese name is Sao Bao Pham, born in 1988, was identified as the central victim in the case. People who knew her described her as a capable and deeply compassionate woman. Within her family, Betty was always spoken of as a devoted daughter, and in the wider community, she was a dedicated colleague and a sincere friend. At work, Betty stood out for her professionalism and her polished, tasteful style. Many coworkers still remembered her as someone who was always impeccably put together. Some even remarked that she was always the best-dressed person in the office. One coworker once shared that Betty was not only a devoted mother to her 2 children, but also like a gentle mother figure to anyone who had the chance to know her. Indeed, with her thoughtful nature, Betty was always ready to care for loved ones and help those in need, as if they were all part of her own family. In her life, her children were Betty's entire motivation and pride. Her eldest son, Henry Nguyen, 9 years old, was a bright and energetic boy. Henry loved swimming, enjoyed building Lego sets, and played video games, with a curious spirit that always wanted to explore the world around him. The youngest was Shelby Nguyen, 4 years old, dearly adored by her mother and older brother. Shelby was often described as a little angel full of color with an innocent, playful, and lovable personality. Shelby's adorable mischievousness never failed to bring smiles to those around her. Before the tragedy happened, Betty was still living the simple, everyday life of a mother of 2. She skillfully balanced her time between work and caring for her small home. Friends said Betty loved her husband and children deeply, often sharing joy over Henry's school achievements or the innocent things, little Shelby would say. Few could have imagined that behind her gentle smile, Betty may have been quietly enduring cracks in her marriage. According to information later released by investigators, Betty and her husband were in the process of filing for divorce in late 2024. Although specific details were not fully clarified, it was evident that their nearly 10-year marriage had gone through significant conflict and tension, leading to the decision to separate. Betty was described as someone who always put her children's well-being first, so she likely struggled greatly with the prospect of the family no longer being whole. As for the husband, the only suspect identified in the case, Vinh Quang Nguyen, born in 1988, was of Vietnamese origin. With a tall build and a gentle-looking face, Vinh appeared to neighbors as just an ordinary husband and father, with no notable signs of aggression or instability. It was reported that Vinh and his wife both worked at the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, assigned to the Valley Transportation Center, and both were regarded as responsible employees. His life seemed relatively peaceful, with a stable job and a small family with 2 children. However, behind that calm exterior were quiet upheavals that few could detect. According to records from the Santa Clara County Medical Examiner's Office, in late 2024, Vinh Nguyen was documented as being in a depressed state. Family members said he frequently suffered from insomnia and showed clear signs of emotional decline. It is likely that the pressure from the breakdown of his marriage had weighed heavily on his mental state. During that period, vague anxieties seemed to consume Vinh's mind. He feared losing his home and then not being able to be with his children, or simply the feeling of failure and helplessness in life. Instead of seeking psychological support, Vinh chose to withdraw, silently enduring prolonged sadness. The family said their concern for Vinh grew in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Notably, during this same period, he unexpectedly purchased a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. For someone who previously had no habit of collecting or using firearms, this action made relatives uneasy, especially because it coincided with a time when Vinh's mental state appeared to be seriously deteriorating. According to the investigation, Vinh had no criminal record or history of violent behavior. The Milpitas Police Department confirmed that it had never previously received any information suggesting signs of abuse in his household. This indicated that if there were conflicts within the family, everything happened in silence and was never reported to authorities. East Asian cultural norms may have led the couple to keep private matters hidden rather than seeking outside help. In addition, Vinh had no formal medical record of a psychiatric disorder. His earlier depression was described only as an unstable state. As a result, he had never been required to undergo mandatory treatment or participate in counseling. Any signs of instability, if present, unfolded quietly behind closed doors, noticed by relatives, mainly through his prolonged insomnia and increasingly visible sadness. Later, many people who knew Vin expressed shock when recalling the case. They could not believe he would take such an extreme action, because in their eyes, Vin had always been gentle and showed no obvious signs of abnormal behavior. Yet perhaps the long-term pressure, combined with a sense of deadlock and an inability to share his struggles, silently accumulated, pushing him to the brink and leading to a decision that ended in tragedy. Because the suspect died at the scene, the case was permanently closed without any trial or criminal sentencing ever taking place. Even so, the pain it left behind continued to smolder within the community. Both sides of the victims' families were forced to face an immense loss. In late December 2024, they held a joint funeral for Betty Pham and her 2 children. Due to the exceptional circumstances, the service was conducted quietly within the circle of family and close acquaintances in order to avoid media attention. In those days, many nearby residents voluntarily came to light incense and place memorial flowers as a way to share the grief and quietly bid farewell to the mother and her 2 children. Coworkers at the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, where both Betty and Vin had worked, also held a small memorial for the victims. They pooled donations to help cover funeral expenses and support the relatives during a difficult period. A subsequent online fundraising campaign raised more than $25,000 to cover arrangements for Betty and her 2 children and to ease part of the burden on the family. The tragedy involving Vin Quang Nguyen's family quickly sent shockwaves through the Vietnamese community in the United States and drew significant attention from local residents. Major outlets such as CBS, ABC, 7, and KTVU reported on the case, leaving many stunned that a father could inflict such a heartbreaking tragedy on his own family. The media described it as a family tragedy that may have been preventable, a painful assessment that also serves as a reminder of how important it is to pay attention to mental health and safety within every household. The case raised many haunting questions. For example, what was truly happening in Vin Nguyen's mind on that fateful night? Were there warning signs that people around him unknowingly overlooked? Sadly, to this day, there have been no clear clues that can fully explain those questions. The precise motive behind his actions will most likely remain unknown. All that can be offered now is the speculation that a convergence of prolonged depression, suppressed emotions, and deep despair pushed Vin toward a desperate decision. Another tragic detail was that Vin quietly purchased a firearm during a period of mental decline, something that should have been seen as a warning signal. If family members or the community had recognized that change earlier and intervened in time, perhaps the tragedy would not have unfolded in such a devastating way. From a legal perspective, the case also sparked debate around gun control and domestic violence. Many people asked how a man experiencing depression, in the context of a collapsing marriage, could still purchase a firearm so easily. In reality, current background check procedures tend to focus primarily on criminal records or officially documented legal violations. Meanwhile, factors such as mental health concerns, psychological crises, or major personal upheavals are far more difficult to detect and evaluate during the screening process. This has left many people worried that the current control system still has certain gaps. As a result, many experts argue that it may be time to consider tightening regulations on the purchase and possession of firearms, especially in cases where a buyer is going through psychological instability or major turbulence in their personal life. Although this is a complex issue that requires balancing individual rights and public safety, the Milpitas case once again shows just how severe the consequences can be when hidden risks are not recognized in time. In the end, the case involving Vin Quang Nguyen, the family tragedy in Milpitas, became a profound warning about mental health and violence in modern society. This story reminds us that even in families that appear warm and stable on the surface, tragedy can still unfold quietly when despair is not shared and support does not arrive in time. Perhaps every individual and every family should treat this as a costly lesson, to pay closer attention to the mental well-being of loved ones, to equip themselves with knowledge on preventing domestic abuse, and to clearly understand responsibility and safety when it comes to access to dangerous weapons. After the incident, Milpitas authorities widely shared information about crisis support and domestic violence hotlines, encouraging residents to seek help proactively when they feel trapped or overwhelmed. Hopefully, the heartbreaking loss of Betty Pham and her 2 children will not be in vain, but will awaken others and help prevent similar tragedies in the future. On the morning of the 12th of March, 2020, a man in a panicked state arrived at a police station to report that one of his employees had suddenly gone missing. He stated that on the previous afternoon, the 11th of March, Hung Nguyen, a 42-year-old female employee, had worked as usual and was last seen leaving the office at approximately 5:26 in the evening. She drove her silver 2006 Toyota Camry home, just like every other day. However, by the next morning, when Hung failed to show up at work and could not be contacted by any means, the man's concern began to grow. Knowing that she lived with her elderly mother and younger brother, he immediately called her family to check on her, but her relatives also had no idea about her whereabouts and were unable to reach her. More concerning was the fact that Hung's wallet and all of her keys were still left at home, making her disappearance even more puzzling. Alongside reporting the case to the police, Hung's friends, especially her close friend Linda Cao, quickly spread out to search for her whereabouts. They created a Facebook group called Kuok Tim Kiem Hung Nguyen to seek public assistance and share related information. According to one friend, the last text message they received from Hung was sent at around 8:30 in the evening on the 11th of March, not long after she got off work. In the message, Hung said that she had just stopped by the gym to work out and was on her way home. From that moment on, her phone went completely silent. The search continued into the 13th of March in an atmosphere of tension and anxiety. Hung's family and friends were almost never away from their phones, nervously waiting for any lead. Her elderly mother anxiously hoped for her daughter's return, while her younger brother, Hua Fang Nguyen, 37 years old, recalled that later that evening he heard the door open and close twice. Believing his sister had only come home to grab something and then left again, Hua did not suspect anything unusual. At around 8 in the evening on the 13th of March, a neighbor living near the Robin Hood Drive area noticed an unfamiliar car that had been parked since the previous night in a quiet, isolated lot at the end of the street. The silver sedan, with a familiar license plate, made them think of the missing person information circulating in the community. Sensing something was wrong, the neighbor immediately called the police. Shortly afterward, the District 7 Patrol Unit of the New Orleans Police Department quickly arrived at the scene. The vehicle was confirmed to be Hung Nguyen's Toyota Camry. However, when investigators opened the trunk, they were horrified to find her body curled up inside. Blood had soaked through the victim's clothing, indicating that she had been struck by at least one fatal gunshot. Notably, the car showed no signs of a traffic collision, the windows were not smashed, and there were no indications of theft, ruling out the possibility of a random carjacking. The trunk was tightly closed, suggesting the perpetrator had deliberately concealed the body to delay discovery. Inside the Camry, police also found some of Hung's personal belongings, such as a jacket and athletic shoes. These details suggested that she may have gone home to change after leaving work, which closely matched what her friends said about Hung going to the gym on the evening of the 11th of March. Investigators also noted that the abandoned car was found only about 7 blocks from Hung's home, just over 1 kilometer a distance, that was unusually close. This immediately raised suspicion that the perpetrator might have been very familiar with the area, or simply did not have enough time or the means to move the body any farther. Police immediately delivered the tragic news to the family. After 2 days of searching with only a fragile hope, Hung was found, but in the most heartbreaking way. Her mother collapsed upon learning that her daughter would never return, while friends sobbed over the message spreading on Facebook, "Hung has been found, but she's gone." Right after that, police began a thorough review of Hung Nguyen's background to gather information and narrow down potential suspects. Hung was a Vietnamese woman born and raised in New Orleans. Friends described her as cheerful, energetic, and always radiating positive energy. Although she had not married, Hung still held many plans for the future and hoped that one day she would build a home of her own. As the eldest daughter in an immigrant family, after her father passed away, Hung lived with and devotedly cared for her mother and her younger brother, who was 5 years younger. Her devotion and affection for her family made her well liked by those around her. Hung was also a former student of Abramson High School in the New Orleans East area, where she once took part in many community activities. According to Councilmember Cindy Nguyen, Hung's cousin, she was very active in the local Vietnamese community, always wearing a friendly smile and ready to help the people around her. At work, Hung was regarded as serious and dedicated. She previously worked in the insurance field before moving into a position as an advertising sales representative for a local newspaper in New Orleans. Her colleagues appreciated her for her professional work style and the way she always put clients' interests first. In the eyes of friends and relatives, Hung nearly had no conflicts or grudges with anyone. Her life was fairly routine, working during the day, sometimes stopping by the gym in the early evening, or attending activities at church, then returning home to be with her mother. The relationship between Hung and her younger brother, Hua Fongwing, was also seen by neighbors as completely normal. The two siblings lived under the same roof, but had never shown signs of arguing or raising their voices. That is why Hung's brutal death left everyone shocked. Many could not help but wonder, what could have pushed a gentle woman private, careful, and loved by those around her towards such a heartbreaking end? As soon as this was confirmed to be a homicide, the Homicide Division of the New Orleans Police Department immediately took over the scene and launched an urgent investigation. Every clue, no matter how small, was carefully collected with the goal of finding the perpetrator's trail. For the moment, police focused on reconstructing the victim's movements on her final day. From the account of her close friend Linda, they determined that after work on the afternoon of the 11th of March, Hung stopped by the gym to work out before returning home. This detail suggested that she most likely arrived home later that evening. Based on this information and the evidence from the scene, police split the investigation into two parallel directions. On one hand, they reviewed the security camera system around the victim's home and along the route leading to where the car was found. On the other hand, investigators interviewed people connected to Hung to trace leads through her relationships. Because of her age and poor health, Hung's mother was only able to provide very limited information. She said that at around 9 in the evening on the 11th of March, she heard the door open but assumed the children were coming and going as usual, so she did not pay attention. In the first interview, Hua Fongwin, the victim's younger brother, appeared cooperative with police. He said he had been home the entire evening, did not directly see his sister, and only heard the door open and close a few minutes apart. So he assumed his sister had come home and then left again shortly afterward. Hua also insisted that he had no idea what had happened to her. However, his rather cold, emotionless manner of answering caught investigators' attention. After that, a major turning point came from surveillance footage. A private home security camera on Robin Hood Drive captured an image of a man stepping out of Hung's Toyota Camry at around dawn on the 12th of March. Although the footage was not very clear, the man's build gave a strangely familiar impression. In addition, a neighbor's camera near Hung's house recorded that late on the night of the 11th of March, Hung's Camry left the garage and quietly drove away from the home. From the images they obtained, police decided to extract still frames of the man seen on camera and bring them to the family for identification. With just one glance, a relative froze upon recognizing that the build and face were Hua Fongwin, Hung's younger brother. This discovery tore through the veil of mystery surrounding the case, as suspicion began pointing straight toward the biological brother who had been living under the same roof as the victim. Heartbroken and outraged, Hung's family and relatives still hoped this was only a mistake, but the clear images from the camera made it impossible to deny the harsh reality. Nearly at the same time, the forensic team reported the results of data extraction from Hung's mobile phone. The data showed that after leaving work and going to the gym, her phone returned to the area of her home at around 9 in the evening on the 11th of March, matching the text sent at 8:30 and the statements about the door opening that night. From that point onward, the victim's phone showed absolutely no further activity. This suggested that Hung most likely encountered trouble as soon as she returned home that evening. As the key clues were pieced together, an increasingly clear picture emerged for investigators. Hua Fongwin likely attacked her at the house, then used his sister's own car to dispose of the body. On the 20th of March, 2020, after consolidating sufficient evidence, the New Orleans Police Department officially issued a warrant for Hua Fongwin. In a press release, authorities stated that through the investigation they had identified Hua Fongwin, the victim's younger brother, as the perpetrator and had obtained an arrest warrant on a charge of second-degree murder. The warrant was quickly approved, but a serious problem immediately emerged. Hua Fongwin had vanished without a trace. Since the first interview with police, he had not appeared in New Orleans, and he was even mysteriously absent from his sister's funeral, which was held that same day. That absence only pushed suspicion further toward him. The family buried Hung in tears while living with the fear that the perpetrator had still not been captured. However, the manhunt did not last long. With coordination between the United States Marshal Service and the Houston, Texas police, Hua Fengwien's trail was quickly tracked down. Less than 2 days after the warrant was issued, on Saturday, the 21st of March, 2020, he was arrested in Houston, about 560 kilometers from New Orleans. At the time he was taken into custody, Hua had a small amount of luggage and identification documents with him, suggesting that he appeared to be trying to flee farther inland. Houston police confirmed that Hua Fengwien was arrested on a warrant as a fugitive from the state of Louisiana and was held at the Harris County Jail. Jail records show that Hua was detained on a second-degree murder charge while awaiting completion of extradition procedures back to Louisiana for investigation and trial. On the 7th of April, 2020, Hua Fengwien appeared in court for the first time before a judge in Houston, Texas for an extradition hearing. Given the particularly serious nature of the case, the defendant was not allowed bail. His arrest partially eased the fear that had weighed on Hoong's family and friends throughout the tense days prior. But at the same time, a painful reality became clearer than ever. The family was forced to face the truth that the person behind the tragedy was their own flesh and blood, and that the legal journey to seek justice for Hoong still lay ahead. So what drove a younger brother to the point of taking his own sister's life? To understand what truly happened, we need to look deeper into who he was and what life was like behind the family's closed doors, where quiet tensions may have been building for a long time. Hua Fengwien, born in 1983, was the only younger brother of the victim, Hoong Nguyen. At the time the incident occurred, he was 37 years old and lived with his mother and older sister in a small house in the New Orleans East area. On the surface, Hua did not show any obvious signs of wrongdoing. Neighbors described him as quiet, not very social, and fairly withdrawn. After graduating from high school, Hua held a number of manual labor jobs, but never kept them for long. More recently, he had become unemployed and was dependent on his mother's household, with most living expenses covered by his sister Hoong Nguyen, who had a stable income. The relationship between the two siblings, according to those around them, was generally nothing out of the ordinary, though minor conflicts still occurred from time to time, something common in many families. Before the incident, there was no record of any serious criminal history for Hua Fengwien. Local police records indicated that he had never been arrested and had no history related to domestic violence. That is why, when the suspect's identity was made public, the community was left stunned. Many people who knew the family were shocked, asking how a younger brother could possibly turn on his own sister. Up to that point, Hua Fengwien's motive remained a major question mark. Police had not announced any specific reason behind his actions. Some theories suggested that Hua may have quietly envied his sister's stability and success, or that there were conflicts between them related to money and family responsibilities. It was also possible that Hua had underlying psychological issues that built up over a long period and ultimately erupted in an extreme way. However, all of these theories remained mere speculation. Since his arrest, Hua Fengwien has remained almost completely silent, offering no confession and no public explanation for what he did. At the extradition hearing in Houston, the defendant kept his head down, spoke little, and appeared dazed. In response to what had happened, he showed no clear remorse or visible emotion. That cold, detached attitude only deepened the pain of those left behind. The family not only lost a daughter, but also effectively lost their remaining son, because he was the one who caused the entire tragedy without anyone being able to understand why. An old photo of Hoong and Hua, one smiling brightly while the other stood quietly beside his sister, has now become an image that haunts many people. After Hua Fengwien was extradited back to New Orleans, criminal proceedings moved forward in accordance with legal procedure. A grand jury indicted Hua for second-degree murder, alleging that he intentionally took the life of his own older sister. The trial was scheduled to take place at the Orleans Parish Court, but the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 caused Louisiana's court system to fall into a prolonged slowdown, and preliminary hearings were repeatedly rescheduled. Hua's case was no exception. Worse, in the early stage, Hua Fengwien pleaded not guilty and maintained an uncooperative attitude. As a result, the process of collecting evidence and taking statements stretched on for many months. Even so, prosecutors worked to complete a full case file, including surveillance video footage, forensic reports related to ballistics, witness statements among them, relatives who directly identified Hua on camera, and the defendant's own early statements, which contained multiple contradictions. This entire chain of evidence put Hua in a clearly unfavorable position. From 2021 to 2022, as court operations gradually stabilized, hearings began to resume in a more normal sequence. However, to this day, many sources still report that Hua Fong-Wint remains in custody awaiting trial, while the official trial continues to be delayed due to the backlog of cases after the pandemic. Even so, it is expected that Hua will have difficulty avoiding a severe legal outcome in the future. Under Louisiana law, second-degree murder carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without parole. That means if convicted, Hua Fong-Wint would serve the rest of his life in prison. In this case, the prosecution is not required to establish a motive. It only needs to prove that the defendant intentionally took the victim's life. Meanwhile, the victim's family continues to quietly wait for justice, even though every mention of the case reopens the pain. No one can believe that the person who caused the tragedy was the victim's own younger brother. Locally, residents not only mourned Hung, a gentle woman who loved life, but were also outraged by Hua's brutal act. On social media, countless condolences and images of candlelight vigils for Hung were continuously shared. Many people left comments praying that she rest in peace, while also expressing anger over Hua's crime. People in the New Orleans East area still have not recovered from the shock of something that seems like it only happens in movies, yet happened right next door. At a simple memorial, friends called Hung an angel who has gone to heaven, and they encouraged her elderly mother to stay strong through the crushing grief of losing her child. The case of Hua Fong-Wint killing his older sister. Hung Nguyen also sent deep shockwaves through the Vietnamese community in New Orleans and drew attention from the American media. It happened right as the pandemic was breaking out, which meant the information did not spread as widely as many other homicide cases. Even so, the cruelty of this family tragedy has left a heavy mark on everyone who learned about it. This case also raised many painful questions about the perpetrator's true motive. To this day, police have not released a specific cause, leading the public to continue speculating. Was it money, long-simmering family conflict, or hidden psychological disturbances in Hua Fong-Wint? A younger brother killing his own older sister is extremely rare, so it is understandable that the public wants to know what happened behind that family's closed doors. Sadly, some secrets may have gone with Hung forever, while the perpetrator still refuses to speak. This shocking case has become a reminder that domestic violence sometimes does not show obvious outward signs. Quiet conflicts can build up over the years and erupt into tragedy if they are not recognized and addressed in time. On a chilly morning in late January 2018, a group of hikers walking along a trail in the Forest Hill Road area near Clementine Lake in Placer County accidentally discovered several bone fragments lying in thick roadside bushes. Curious and assuming they were animal bones, they moved closer for a better look, only to be startled as they realized these were most likely human remains. Panicked, the group immediately called the police. Minutes later, Placer County authorities quickly arrived and secured the scene. The sight before them was grim. The remains were heavily decomposed, leaving only bones scattered across the area beneath the trees, just a few dozen meters from the road, but hidden deep within dense brush. The stench of decay was gone due to the amount of time that had passed, replaced instead by an eerie, bone-chilling cold. Based on the condition of the remains, police estimated that the person had been dead for several months. The victim's clothing was reduced to only a few rotten scraps, not enough to determine gender or identity on the spot. At first, police could not even conclude whether this was a homicide. However, the presence of skeletal remains deep in the forest was certainly unusual. If this was a murder followed by an attempt to dispose of the body, the killer likely calculated that the victim would remain here forever alone, blending into the forest floor and disappearing without anyone ever knowing. The scene was examined meticulously, centimeter by centimeter. In addition to the bones, police collected other clues, such as tire tracks pressed into the soft ground and a long skid mark leading down a steep slope. It appeared that a car had been pushed into a nearby ravine sometime earlier. But there was no vehicle at the scene, perhaps it had already been towed away. This detail made police even more inclined to believe this was an attempt to conceal a crime. A cold-blooded and ruthless plot gradually began to take shape in the investigators' minds. But to know exactly what had happened, police needed to launch a large-scale investigation to piece together, step by step, the missing parts of the picture. At first, the victim's identity remained a major question. Placer County investigators carried out a series of forensic steps, including collecting bone samples for DNA analysis, checking missing persons records, and paying close attention to one key lead: a suspicious vehicle that had reportedly been towed out of this area a few months earlier. It was here that the puzzle pieces began to fit together. One county officer suddenly recalled a strange incident in October 2017. He stated that there truly had been a car pushed into a ravine. The information was forwarded to the investigative team. After reviewing records, they found a report about a Toyota Camry that had been towed from the scene that night and taken to a local impound lot. The car was still there because no one had come to claim it. Police immediately went to inspect the vehicle and made a shocking discovery. Inside, they found a passport and identification documents in the name of Tran. At the same time, forensic results were also starting to come in. The victim was female, likely in her late 20s, of Asian descent. Everything matched the information on the passport. In addition, according to the witness account from the officer who had handled the ravine incident, the physical description of the person who pushed the car closely resembled a relative of Tran, her husband, Michael Abeyta. This turning point broke the deadlock in the investigation. Police immediately suspected the victim was Tran, and the number one suspect was none other than her husband. After cross-checking international student and immigration records, police were able to confirm that the person left behind in that remote area was Tran, born in 1995, a passionate and dreamy young Vietnamese woman. In 2016, at the age of 21, Tran went to the United States to study, driven by a desire to pursue knowledge and experience a new life. She attended the University of West Florida and quickly adapted to her new environment, even without family by her side. Friends described Tran as cheerful, friendly, and very kind to everyone. She lived wholeheartedly and warmly, so she was well liked by many. 1 year after arriving in the United States, Tran met Michael Abeyta, born in 1989, who was studying at the University of Central Florida at the time. This chance encounter quickly grew into love. Tran loved deeply, so deeply that she even overlooked troubling signs about her boyfriend. Perhaps in a foreign country far from home, Tran felt lonely and longed for someone to lean on, so she gave her whole heart to Michael, hoping to build a happy future. In late 2016, Tran discovered that she was pregnant with Michael's child. Overwhelmed with joy, the young and naive woman believed this was the sweet fruit of love and a guarantee of marital happiness. They decided to get married quickly. A simple wedding was held in a rushed ceremony in Las Vegas, when Tran was just 22 years old. After that, the couple moved to Citrus Heights, California, and began their married life. At that time, Tran temporarily stopped studying to focus on taking care of their small family and preparing to welcome the baby. She still kept in frequent contact with friends through social media, sharing happy moments with her husband. In September 2017, only about 4 months before her body was found, Tran even posted photos on Facebook showing a night of eating pizza and watching movies with her husband. Yet now, that ambitious young woman who once trusted and loved life had been reduced to cold skeletal remains. And even more painfully, the suspect was most likely the very man who shared her bed. After confirming the victim's identity and narrowing down the suspect, Placer County investigators launched a comprehensive investigation to gather evidence. As an initial step to avoid tipping off the suspect, they did not immediately release the victim's identity, revealing only that a woman's remains had been found in a wooded area near Lake Clementine. Next, the investigative team invited forensic anthropology experts from Chico State and the California Department of Justice Laboratory to help analyze the remains. Their task was to reconstruct the skeleton and determine the victim's sex, age, ancestry, and estimated time of death. Based on their findings, they estimated the body had been exposed outdoors for more than 3 months. However, due to the severe decomposition, the cause of death could not be determined precisely. The major bones showed no evidence of gunshot wounds or easily identifiable trauma, so the possibility of death by suffocation could not be ruled out. Even so, based on the apparent attempt to dispose of the body and the evidence at the scene, investigators remained convinced this was a homicide. In parallel, DNA samples from the victim's bones and teeth were compared with DNA from Tran's relatives in Vietnam, once again confirming the identity of the international student. The most critical lead now was the Toyota Camry. According to records, it was recovered on October 10, 2017. Inside, in addition to Tran's passport, investigators also found several of her personal belongings, confirming that the car was directly linked to the victim. The fact that her husband, Michael, never reported the car missing or came to claim it for such a long time only heightened suspicion. Meanwhile, investigators focused on reconstructing Tran and Michael's timeline in the days leading up to her disappearance. Investigators went to the apartment complex where the couple had been living in Citrus Heights to ask around. Several neighbors said they had not seen Tran for a long time, and they had not heard any report that she was missing. Some neighbors vaguely recalled that around early October 2017, they heard arguing coming from the couple's apartment, and after that, they did not see Tran again. These statements further strengthened suspicions that Michael had harmed his wife. The most crucial witness was the patrol officer who had seen Abeyta pushing the car that night. He was asked to provide an official statement and confirmed that he had seen a young man whose build and appearance matched Michael Abeyta, struggling to push the Camry down the slope. At the time, he had not known about any disappearance, but now this testimony became the perfect missing piece linking Michael to the disposal site. In addition, police examined electronic data and traced Michael's credit card activity and mobile phone movements during the relevant time period. The results showed that on the night of October 9th into the early morning of October 10th, 2017, Abeyta's phone had connected to a cell tower in the area near Forest Hill Road, exactly where the crime scene was located. Michael leaving home in the middle of the night and appearing at the very place where his wife was disposed of was undeniable. With that body of evidence, police believed they had sufficient grounds to arrest Michael Abeyta. Just 3 days after the remains were found, Placer County authorities decided to act quickly. On January 30th, 2018, a police team went to Citrus Heights to arrest Michael Forrest Abeyta. He was taken into custody without a chance to resist. The next day, on February 1st, 2018, Michael was denied bail and held without bond. In the interrogation room, he initially evaded responsibility and denied the charges, but as he learned the evidence against him was piling up, he finally admitted guilt. Although he did not clearly describe his actions or exactly how he killed his wife, Michael revealed that his marriage to Tran had fallen apart after she suffered a miscarriage and that he felt trapped. With the main suspect refusing to provide a detailed account, police could only document the case file and consult experts in criminal psychology. From there, investigators viewed Michael Abeyta's motive in two possible directions, both stemming from the fact that Tran could not carry the pregnancy to term. The first explanation was that he may have seen his wife as a possession and only wanted the Vietnamese woman to bear him a child. So when she miscarried, he believed the purpose of the marriage was gone, his feelings had dried up, and he chose to eliminate her rather than divorce. Perhaps he feared divorce would be complicated or simply did not want to split assets or pay support, so he chose the most brutal option. The second explanation suggested that Michael suffered from severe paranoia. He felt deceived and believed Tran had gotten pregnant only to force him into marriage. That twisted mindset may have driven him to resent his wife after she lost the baby. Whatever the specific reason, Abeyta's behavior after the crime showed extreme cold-bloodedness, no remorse, no fear, continuing to indulge in his own life. According to acquaintances, after marrying Tran and moving to California, he did not have stable employment. After his wife went missing, Michael quickly plunged into heavy drinking, drugs, and even brief one-night relationships. All of it painted the picture of a monster disguised as a prince, charming in the tear-soaked love story of an unfortunate young woman far from home. Michael Forrest Abeyta was born in 1989, about 28 years old at the time of the crime in 2017. He was an American citizen, Caucasian, and grew up in the state of Florida. Abeyta's childhood and family background were not widely covered by the media, suggesting he likely had no serious criminal record prior to this case. Michael was also described as intelligent and educated, having studied at the University of Central Florida, where he met Tran. However, acquaintances said his personality was somewhat unstable and that he enjoyed partying. Indeed, after marrying Tran and moving to California, he did not have a stable job. He could only get by on a small amount of part-time income and financial support from his family. His involvement with alcohol, illegal substances, and extramarital affairs after his wife went missing showed that Abeyta was a pleasure seeker and deeply irresponsible. Psychologically, Michael Abeyta was described as a monster hiding behind the mask of a husband. He displayed an almost unbelievable level of cruelty, killing his wife as if discarding an old object, then continuing to live a depraved life as if nothing had happened without a shred of remorse. He showed no signs of mental illness. All of his actions appeared to be carried out in a clear-headed, cold, and calculating state. That very coldness enraged the public and deepened the sorrow for the victim. Ironically, Abeyta had once appeared to love Tran, but that love was fragile and selfish. When things did not go his way, his true nature as a violent man surfaced. He not only took the life of an innocent young woman, but also shattered many people's faith in love and kindness. From the clues and statements obtained from him, police were able to partially reconstruct how the crime unfolded at the hands of this devil. It began in mid-2017, when the rushed, seemingly rosy marriage between international student Tran and her husband, Michael Abeyta, started to become turbulent, especially after Tran said she had miscarried. Michael had once been excited at the thought of becoming a father, and they had married in part because the baby was on the way. But when that hope collapsed, conflicts erupted. Michael grew distant and irritable toward his wife. Instead of helping her through the grief of losing their child, he gradually revealed his selfish and ruthless nature. From the autumn of 2017, their home in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento, no longer held laughter, only arguments and suspicion. Then, on the night of October 9th, 2017, inside the four walls of their apartment, another explosive argument broke out. In a cold, furious rage, Michael attacked the wife who had shared his life in bed. After Tran died, the killer was left alone with his wife's lifeless body. After a brief moment of shock, he decided to remove his wife from the apartment, quietly moving her to the car in the dead of night without anyone noticing. He drove the couple's Toyota Camry, transporting his wife's body toward a remote forested mountain area in Placer County. His destination was a deserted stretch of Forest Hill Road near Clementine Lake. It was a place with very little traffic during the day and even more desolate at night. The cold-blooded husband deliberately chose this location because it was surrounded by dense vegetation and steep drop-offs, perfect for hiding his crime. At around 2 o'clock in the early morning of October 10th, 2017, Abeyta drove to the spot he had planned. He dragged Tran's body out of the car and pulled it deeper into the brush, only a few dozen meters from the road, but far enough to be out of sight. After that, he returned to the car and decided to erase the last remaining trace. Michael drove the vehicle toward the edge of the ravine and used his strength to push it down the slope, hoping it would fall far away and deep enough that no one would ever find it. The Camry slid a long distance, struck some bushes, and came to a stop partway down the cliff. But Abeyta did not linger. He immediately left the scene, abandoning the car perched precariously on the slope and disappearing into the darkness. Ironically for Abeyta, his reckless attempt to dispose of evidence did not fool anyone. In fact, the person who witnessed it was a patrol officer at dawn. The officer quickly realized this was not a normal accident, but looked like someone had intentionally pushed the car to conceal something. He managed to memorize the license plate and get a rough description of the man, even watching closely until Michael drove away. The vehicle was later pulled up and taken to a local accident impound lot where it waited for its owner to claim it. But in October 2017, the incident was treated only as a suspicious abandoned car, and the lead faded into obscurity. After committing the crime, Michael Abeyta returned home and began acting as though nothing had happened. He did not report his wife missing. If anyone asked, he may have fabricated a story that Tran had left on her own. In reality, because Tran was an international student far from her family, with few relatives nearby, her absence for some time did not raise immediate suspicion. In the months that followed, friends and family in Vietnam tried to contact her, but Abeyta likely reassured them with lies. He was confident that with the body hidden deep in the forest, no one could find it and that he had gotten away with it. But in the end, justice closed in and the cold-blooded husband was finally caught. After his arrest, Michael Abeyta went through legal proceedings that lasted nearly 2 years. At first, he was charged with first-degree murder. If convicted under that charge, Abeyta could have faced the maximum penalty. However, in July 2019, to avoid a lengthy trial with an uncertain outcome, Abeyta accepted a plea deal with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, meaning he admitted to killing his wife but without premeditation. In return, the prosecutor sought a lighter sentence. On October 1st, 2019, the court in Placer County held a sentencing hearing for Michael Abeyta. The proceeding was not long because the defendant had already pleaded guilty, so it mainly focused on sentencing and statements from the victim's family. Tran's parents flew from Vietnam to the United States to attend the hearing with assistance from agents of the U.S. Diplomatic Security Service. Their presence, the hollow, grief-stricken faces of the elderly couple, brought the courtroom to a heavy, emotional silence. They had waited nearly 2 years to see the man who killed their daughter held accountable. In court, the prosecution presented a summary of the case. Deputy District Attorney Mariam Baxley submitted a sentencing memorandum outlining the brutal details of the crime. Prosecutors emphasized the defendant's cruelty and cold-bloodedness. On the other side, there was no significant defense argument from the defendant. Abeda's attorney could only ask the court for as much leniency as possible within the plea agreement. Judge Suzanne Gazaniga of the Placer County Superior Court imposed the sentence consistent with that agreement. Defendant Michael Abeda was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, meaning he must serve a minimum of 15 years, after which he may be considered for parole depending on his rehabilitation. However, given the seriousness of the case, it is very likely he will serve far longer, possibly for life, if the parole board determines he still poses a danger. When the sentence was announced, Tran's parents held each other and broke down in tears. They spoke in court about their family's irreparable loss. Tran's friends expressed anger, believing that 15 years was not proportionate to the extreme brutality of his crime. Even so, prosecutors stated that the guilty plea helped spare the victim's family a long, painful trial and ensured the killer received an appropriate punishment rather than taking the risk that a jury might convict him of a lesser offense. Afterward, Abeda began serving his sentence in a California state prison. He was still relatively young, so even if he becomes eligible for parole after 15 years, his criminal past will follow him forever. Tran's family later shared that they were somewhat relieved that justice had been served, but nothing could ever bring Tran back to them. At 9 p.m. on September 8, 2009, New Haven police received an urgent call from a young woman reporting that her roommate had suddenly gone out of contact, even though she had always been extremely punctual. The missing person was identified as Annie Marie Lay, 24 years old, a highly promising Vietnamese-American graduate researcher at Yale University. Investigators arrived immediately and quickly narrowed down the last known place Annie had been seen. It was 10 Amistad Street, the building she had entered to conduct experiments early in the morning on September 8th. Police urgently pulled all data from the building's security camera system as well as its keycard entry logs. The results showed that at 10 a.m., Annie swiped her card and went inside. However, there was absolutely no footage of her leaving, even though the building had more than 70 surveillance cameras densely covering exits and the parking areas. Suspecting Annie might still be inside the building, police immediately locked the place down and turned it into the central crime scene of the investigation. A large-scale search was launched at once, mobilizing more than 100 personnel, including New Haven Police, Connecticut State Police, FBI agents, and K-9 units to comb through every corner in detail. The search did not stop there. It was expanded to areas outside the building as well, from Yale's waste handling system all the way to an incineration facility in Hartford. Every location was examined meticulously to ensure no clue was overlooked. At the same time, as soon as the report came in, the university issued an emergency alert across campus, calling on everyone to help provide information. Not until September 12th did the search team discover a blood-soaked set of clothing hidden above the ceiling of a laboratory in the building. It included a lab coat and protective lab pants, along with a pair of rubber gloves. However, after checking, the outfit did not belong to Annie. This discovery led authorities to believe the perpetrator had deliberately changed into clean clothes after the crime in an attempt to conceal what had happened. On the afternoon of September 13th, after 5 days of searching, investigators found the body of a woman in a basement laboratory. The victim was discovered upside down, stuffed into a narrow wall cavity behind a sink. Severe injuries on her body indicated she had suffered brutal physical force before death. In addition, her clothing showed signs of disturbance, raising suspicion that the perpetrator had committed a sexual assault before taking her life. On September 14, 2009, after completing identity verification procedures, New Haven police officially confirmed that the body was Annie Lay. As soon as news of the case became widely public, the public was left stunned and shaken, because the victim was a very young graduate researcher with an exceptionally bright future ahead of her. According to information provided by her family and colleagues, Annie Marie Thulé was born in 1985. She was a Vietnamese-American woman with an impressive academic background. From an early age, Annie achieved outstanding results, graduating as valedictorian of Union Mine High School in California, then earning multiple scholarships in biology at the University of Rochester in New York. After graduating with honors, she continued pursuing her passion for science by being accepted into the prestigious Yale University PhD program in pharmacology. At Yale, Annie Lay was not only admired by professors and peers for her exceptional ability, but also loved for her gentle, warm, and kind personality. During her research at Yale University, Annie was assigned to oversee pharmacology experiments inside 10 Amistad Street. Each day, she worked alongside technicians responsible for caring for and cleaning the animal research facilities in the basement, while also supporting related studies. Known as a careful and meticulous person, Annie always strictly followed biosafety procedures and had never been involved in any serious conflicts with colleagues. That was why no one could imagine that the familiar workplace environment was hiding a terrifying danger aimed at her. In her personal life, Annie was in a loving relationship with Jonathan Wadowski, a physics graduate student at Columbia University in New York. The two had known each other since college and officially became engaged in 2009. As planned, they were set to hold their wedding on September 13th on Long Island, just a few days after Annie's 25th birthday. But tragically, family and friends who traveled from California to New York to prepare for that special day instead received the devastating news of her death, an unbearable pain that nothing could ever make whole. After Annie's body was found, investigators immediately focused on people who worked inside the building. The scene suggested the perpetrator likely understood the internal layout and had enough time to conceal the crime. 10 Amistad Street was a high-security research facility where entrances and laboratories required employee key cards, making an outside break-in highly unlikely. While reviewing the list of personnel present on September 8th, investigators paid special attention to Raymond John Clark III, 24 years old, an animal research technician assigned to the basement where Annie's lab was located. Keycard data showed that shortly after Annie entered a basement lab room, Clark also swiped in just minutes later. From that moment on, no camera captured Annie again, while Clark continued going about his routine as if nothing had happened. When police approached him for a statement, Clark initially appeared cooperative and calmly answered questions like other employees. However, FBI agents quickly noticed multiple unusual marks on his body, scratches on his face and ear, long claw-like lines running along his arm, and a large bruise clearly visible on his chest. Under questioning, Clark repeatedly offered excuses, at times claiming a cat had scratched him, and at other times saying he was injured while playing softball. But the moment agents began photographing the injuries for documentation, Clark's composure collapsed. He became visibly tense and quickly asked for a lawyer, immediately ending the interview. This sudden change in attitude only made the investigative team more confident that their suspicions were closing in on him. On September 15th and September 16th, authorities quickly obtained an emergency search warrant for Raymond Clark III. On the night of September 15th, they suddenly raided his apartment at 40 Ferry Street in Middletown to conduct a search and collect DNA samples for forensic testing. In addition, the two vehicles Clark regularly used were seized to check for any related traces. After the samples were collected, Clark was temporarily allowed to go home while the forensic lab analyzed the evidence. However, instead of staying at his apartment as usual, he quietly left and rented a room at a motel in the nearby town of Cromwell. Throughout that time, investigators continued to shadow Clark discreetly in case he attempted to flee. And less than 48 hours later, the forensic results delivered a definitive answer. The analysis showed that Raymond Clark's DNA was an exact match to male DNA found on the victim's clothing, as well as on the laboratory wall. In addition, a blood-soaked sock found in the ceiling contained a mixture of DNA from both Annie and Clark, evidence that the two had previously been involved in a violent struggle. In the basement laboratory, investigators also discovered a blood spatter streak on the wall. Nearby were multiple specks of blood and faint white marks on the floor and wall, close to where the body had been hidden. When they checked the drainage system, they found additional traces of washed-away blood, showing the perpetrator had tried to clean up a large amount of blood to destroy evidence. These scene findings fully match the medical examiner's conclusion that Annie died of mechanical asphyxiation caused by severe compression of the neck, most likely from a chokehold or a direct assault. Her body also showed signs of a fractured jaw and collarbone, confirming an intense attack. Not only that, Clark's body was also covered with scratch marks, showing that Annie bravely fought back to the very end before she collapsed. Furthermore, when police searched Raymond Clark's personal locker at the lab, they found protective clothing stained with brownish red marks believed to be blood, along with a pair of white sneakers with faint reddish stains. Security camera footage confirmed that on the morning of September 8th, Clark was wearing that same pair of shoes. Investigators also found human blood traces on the rubber boots he typically used to clean the animal cages. Near the area where the body was discovered, they also found a green pen that was well known to belong to Clark. In addition, inside his fishing tackle box, they found a spool of fishing line of the same type as a piece of line found at the scene. Investigators believed Clark may have used that fishing line to hook onto Annie's clothing in an attempt to drag her body away to dispose of it, but after failing, he was forced to leave it behind. He even sprayed deodorizer around the crime scene to delay the discovery of what happened. In particular, surveillance footage also revealed highly suspicious actions by Clark on the day Annie was reported missing. The moment the alarm rang out, Clark pulled a large bin filled with laboratory cleaning towels over to block a bloodstain investigators had just found. In front of stunned coworkers and security staff, he even knelt down and aggressively scrubbed the floor area and the drain cover, claiming he was cleaning, even though no one had asked him to do so. To police, these movements were most likely a last-ditch attempt to erase any remaining traces of blood after the crime. Digging deeper, police discovered that Raymond Clark III had shown unusual behavior in the week before the killing. Key card data indicated he was repeatedly entering and exiting the laboratories where Annie worked at an abnormally high frequency, up to 11 times in a single day, whereas normally he would go in only 2 to 3 times for job-related duties. This detail led investigators to suspect Clark had been secretly watching Annie and may even have planned in advance, waiting for the right moment to strike. After collecting sufficient evidence, in the early morning of September 17th, investigators suddenly moved in, arrested Raymond Clark III, and brought him to the New Haven Police Department on charges of murdering Annie Lay. Notably, at the moment of arrest, police also found a small handwritten note tucked inside the sock Clark was wearing, containing a few hastily written lines. Investigators believed it was a message asking a coworker to cover for his schedule at the time Annie disappeared, an attempt to fabricate a false alibi. The court quickly approved his detention and set bail at $3 million USD, ensuring the suspect could not be released while the case moved through the legal process. According to investigative records, Raymond John Clark III was born in 1984 in Branford, Connecticut. After graduating from high school, he began working as a laboratory technician at Yale University in 2004. Clark's main duties at 10 Amistad Street involved caring for laboratory mice, including feeding them, cleaning cages, and assisting researchers when needed. Because he worked mostly in the basement and around the animal rooms, he had very little direct contact with graduate researchers like Annie Lay. Before the incident, Clark's personal life was described as fairly stable. He was engaged to his longtime girlfriend, and the two lived together in an apartment in Middletown, Connecticut. Clark came from a working to middle-class family, with his parents and younger sister all living within the same state. That was why, when Clark was arrested, his relatives were hit with a devastating shock. Clark's father insisted his son was a gentle person who loved sports, cared about animals, and always devoted himself to his family and his fiancée. However, when police looked back into Raymond Clark III's past, they found troubling signs of instability. In 2003, while he was still in high school, he was brought in by police in connection with an altercation involving an ex-girlfriend. The girl said Clark often lost his temper and made threatening remarks whenever she tried to break up with him. Although the victim did not pursue criminal charges at the time, the incident still painted a partial picture of Clark's controlling nature and the potential for violence beneath the surface. Some former coworkers also said Clark was extremely perfectionistic, often irritable and quick to anger if work did not go the way he wanted. However, on another level, a few people described him as fairly friendly and easygoing in everyday interactions. Those conflicting pieces suggested that behind a calm exterior, Clark carried a dark and unpredictable side. And perhaps it was that side that quietly led to the heartbreaking tragedy on September 8, 2009. According to the reconstructed timeline, at around 10 a.m. that morning, Annie left her wallet, phone, and keys in the main office, then walked to 10 Amistad Street, the animal research facility. When she entered room G13 to prepare for an experiment, Clark appeared nearby. He may have used excuses related to the animal rooms or cleaning procedures to get close to her. Then, In that secluded space, with a physical advantage, he was able to overpower Annie easily. Even so, evidence from the scene and forensic findings showed she fought back fiercely, leaving multiple marks on his body. The painful struggle also caused Annie to suffer severe injuries before she died from asphyxiation. After the victim collapsed, Clark stood frozen in the blood-strewn room, confronted with what he had done. He quickly made a bold decision to hide the body inside the building to avoid being captured by security cameras. Using a hidden gap behind the wall of the women's restroom in the basement, an area that housed pipes and electrical wiring, Clark removed a panel, pushed Annie inside, and carefully put it back in place. He then returned to room G13 to gather clothing and other items connected to the attack, sprayed deodorizer, and thoroughly wiped down the floors and walls. By midday, taking advantage of the moment the fire alarm sounded, Clark calmly locked the lab door, blended into the evacuation crowd, and continued playing the role of a helpful employee participating in the search for the missing person. For the days that followed, while Annie's friends and Yale's security team searched desperately everywhere, Annie remained hidden behind that wall. Only when abnormal signs began to appear did police decide to break into the wall on September 13th, and they were horrified to discover the heartbreaking truth, bringing the search to an end in overwhelming grief and shock. After his arrest, Raymond Clark III was held at the high-security McDougal Walker prison in Suffield, Connecticut. At first, he insisted he was innocent and entered a not guilty plea in court on January 26, 2010. However, faced with an overwhelming and undeniable body of evidence, Clark gradually realized his chances of escaping responsibility were nearly gone. If the case had gone to a full trial, he risked facing a maximum of up to 60 years in prison for each count of murder and aggravated murder, and could even have received a life sentence without parole. After months of negotiation between prosecutors and defense attorneys, on March 17, 2011, Clark decided to change his plea. At a hearing in New Haven Superior Court, he formally pleaded guilty to murder and first-degree sexual assault. Under the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to drop the aggravated murder charge and proceed only with the sexual assault charge. This agreement spared Annie Lee's family from enduring a lengthy trial, while still ensuring that justice would be carried out with a severe sentence. On June 3, 2011, the sentencing hearing took place in New Haven, in a tense atmosphere, packed with spectators and the media. Annie's family traveled from California in full attendance, including her parents, her brother, and many relatives and friends. Raymond Clark's family was also there. His parents sat directly behind their son, occasionally breaking into tears and softly offering words of support. Most notably, Jonathan Wadowski, Annie's fiancé, sat silently in the front row with a face heavy with grief. After nearly 2 years of silence, Raymond Clark III stood up in court to make his final statement, his voice trembling and his eyes red with tears. With his head lowered, he slowly read an apology and admitted to the brutal crime he had committed. Yet the true motive behind Clark's actions remained unknown, because he never explained a specific reason. At the hearing, Judge Roland Fasano sentenced Raymond Clark III to 44 years in prison for murder and 20 years for first-degree sexual assault to be served concurrently, as agreed. When the sentence was handed down, Clark was 26 years old, meaning he would remain behind bars until 2055 and would only be eligible for release when he was over 70. The murder of Annie Lee shocked the United States and the international public for a long time. In the press, it was often called the tragedy of Yale's bride-to-be, emphasizing the cruel irony of a talented young woman having her life stolen just days before her wedding. International media also covered the story extensively, describing it as a devastating case that unfolded on the campus of a prestigious Ivy League university. True crime programs such as ABC 20/20 and CBS 48 Hours produced dedicated documentaries about the case, drawing the attention of millions of viewers worldwide. At Yale University, the aftershocks of the case were enormous. Immediately after Annie's body was found, a series of prayer gatherings and memorial services were held. Many students admitted that after the case, they began to feel uneasy, even while on campus, an unsettling feeling they had never experienced before. To ensure safety and maintain the quality of teaching and learning, the university urgently expanded counseling services for those affected, while also reviewing all internal security procedures and protective measures. In September 2009, Yale's president issued a series of new measures to improve campus safety and prevent workplace violence. The university also expanded the Public Safety Advisory Committee to include more representatives from human resources, organized training sessions for managers on recognizing and preventing violence, and implemented mandatory criminal background checks for all employees, including temporary workers and those hired through subcontractors. These actions were not only meant to reassure the Yale community, but also became a reference model for many other educational institutions seeking to strengthen security and protect students. What do you think? Was the sentence given to the perpetrator in this case truly proportional to his crime and strong enough to deter others with malicious intent? In the early evening of a day in late September 2023, near an area close to the Oakland estuary in Oakland Bay, a passerby stopped short after noticing an unusual object drifting near the shoreline. Upon moving closer, the person was horrified to realize it was the body of an elderly woman. The passerby immediately shouted for help and called 911 to report the discovery to the Oakland Police Department. Oakland investigators arrived swiftly, urgently securing the scene under the flickering beams of flashlights. Though many details remained unclear, officers instinctively sensed that something about this case was deeply wrong. The Oakland Bay area is not a location where suicides commonly occur, and the victim's appearance and clothing suggested this was unlikely to be a simple accident. With no identification and no witnesses, the woman's identity was a complete mystery. Police decided to transfer the body to the Oakland Medical Examiner's office for an autopsy and registered the victim as a Jane Doe. What no one expected was that this Jane Doe would be connected to another unresolved case in the city of San Pablo, nearly 30 kilometers away. Rewinding to more than 1 week earlier, on September 13th, 2023, a man named Phuc Hung Va contacted police to report that his wife, Ternguk Lee, and his mother-in-law, Mrs. Gui Thi Chun, had been missing for 1 week. Speaking in a panicked tone, he told officers that after a family argument over money, his wife and mother-in-law had driven away from their home on September 6th, 2023, possibly heading to Southern California to visit acquaintances or simply to get away for a while. The vehicle they were using was a white Honda Fit, model year 2017. San Pablo police took the report and began standard initial search procedures. Although Phuc Va insisted that his wife and mother-in-law had left on their own, investigators still went to the couple's home on the 1900 block of Sutter Avenue to look for additional clues. First, they confirmed that Miss Lee's white Honda Fit was indeed missing, just as Va had claimed. Next, officers noticed there were no signs of a struggle or violent confrontation inside the home. On the contrary, everything was unusually tidy and clean, which was exactly what made the situation feel suspicious. In addition, they found what looked like fresh paint on the walls, and part of the floor carpeting appeared to have been recently replaced. This level of meticulousness did not match the state of mind of a man whose wife and mother-in-law had been missing for days, but the next discovery left investigators stunned. In the garage and storage area, detectives found faint traces of blood in some of the floor crevices, as well as on an old rug that had been rolled up and hidden behind the house. A rapid on-scene test indicated it was human blood. Although DNA testing would be needed to determine whose blood it was, seasoned investigators' instincts told them this missing persons case was likely a cover-up and that the husband was hiding something. Beyond the blood evidence, the scene revealed other troubling inconsistencies. Mrs. Gui Thi Chun's medicine cabinet was still fully stocked with medications she would have needed to take if she had truly left home. The cane she regularly used was still standing in a corner. Passports and identification documents for both Mrs. Chun and Ms. Lee were found hidden in a box in the bedroom along with an unfinished naturalization application. There is no way an elderly person would leave behind essentials like that if she had voluntarily decided to go away. Piece by piece, the details showed that Mrs. Chun and Miss Lee had not prepared for any trip at all. They had left abruptly, under unexpected circumstances, with no intention of being gone long term. San Pablo police believed a horrific secret was buried inside Phuc Va's home. But to avoid tipping him off, investigators kept these findings tightly confidential and quietly shifted the case from a missing persons search to a criminal investigation. The house was no longer eerily silent simply because loved ones were gone. It was silent because it seemed to be hiding an unspeakable crime. The question, where are the mother and daughter, now became, what horrific thing happened inside this house? Back in Oakland, in early October 2023, forensic results indicated that the mysterious body belonged to an elderly woman, with no obvious fatal wounds visible on the body. However, examiners noted the victim may have died before entering the water. As for identification, it remained a major challenge because the body was decomposing and had also been in the water for many days. The forensic team attempted to collect the victim's DNA and fingerprints to compare against the National Missing Persons database, but found no matches. The effort to identify her reached a temporary dead end, and the unidentified body was preserved while awaiting further examination results. Oakland police entered the Jane Doe information into the system and alerted nearby law enforcement agencies that an unidentified female body had been found. But in San Pablo, the case involving Mrs. Chun and her daughter was still going nowhere. Throughout October and November 2023, the family and police received no news about the two women. No security camera footage, no direct witnesses, no financial transactions, and no phone activity from either of them after September 6th. They seemed to have vanished into thin air. Then, in early December 2023, an unexpected turning point emerged, gradually linking the two cases together. San Pablo police received an anonymous call from a woman who identified herself as Michelle. She asked about the progress of the investigation, then said one sentence that sent a chill through officers. "I heard you should take a closer look at the husband. He may know more than what he's told you. I'm entry what Alder Redden with Satan." Police quickly traced the phone signal and learned the number was registered to a woman in Alameda, but that woman stated she had never called the police. This suggested the mysterious caller wanted to help, but did not want to be directly involved. Whoever she was, her tip was extremely valuable because for the first time, an outsider had boldly urged police to consider the possibility that Phuc Va might be implicated. San Pablo police decided to expand the investigation in a new direction, treating Phuc Va as a person of interest rather than merely the unfortunate husband of a victim. Investigators were assigned to dig deeper into the family background of Phuc Va and his wife, in hopes of uncovering additional useful leads. Phuc Hong Va, 40 years old, was born in Vietnam and had immigrated to the United States many years earlier. He and his family lived in Northern California and worked in real estate, managing multiple rental properties. On the surface, this line of work made him appear financially secure, but according to some acquaintances, he had not yet paid off debts related to buying or building homes and was therefore under financial strain. Friends described Phuc Va as outgoing and smooth-talking. Perhaps because of that likable image, he also had a reputation for being unfaithful, caught cheating multiple times, forgiven, yet never truly changing. The wife who repeatedly chose to forgive him was Thur Ngoc Ly, 40 years old, a gentle, hard-working Vietnamese woman. She was born in Vietnam and moved to the United States with her family when she was still young. As an adult, Miss Ly worked as a nail technician at a well-known nail salon in the area. The salon owner said she was diligent and honest. Through careful saving, she and her husband were able to buy a small home in San Pablo and even co-invest in several rental units as a source of passive income. Within the family, Miss Ly was described as a capable wife and a devoted mother. Every day after work, she managed the household and took attentive care of the children. Her devotion also showed in her deep filial piety toward her mother. Although her mother lived in a nursing facility to receive medical support, Miss Ly arranged almost every week to bring her mother home to spend time with the grandchildren, or the whole family would visit her in Oakland. That mother was Mrs. Quay T. Chun, 74 years old, originally from southern Vietnam. She came to the United States through family sponsorship. In her later years, with declining health, she stayed at a nursing home in Oakland for regular monitoring, but she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren visited frequently. People who knew Mrs. Chun described her as gentle and quiet, a woman who had spent her entire life working tirelessly to raise her children. Neighbors had seen her gardening with her daughter, growing vegetables, flowers, and herbs. These two women carried admirable qualities and were well loved by those around them. Sadly, their lives gradually fell into a dead end after the presence of Phuc Hong Va entered the picture. Behind the closed doors of the house on Sutter Avenue was a stagnant marriage on the verge of collapse, following Phuc Va's repeated infidelities. Their relationship had been fractured for a long time. Once, Miss Ly caught her husband in a secret affair, and the two had a major argument. From then on, they slept in separate rooms, maintaining the marriage only for the children and their shared assets. Miss Ly had considered ending it, but Phuc Va dismissed the idea, claiming it would be not financially beneficial. If they divorced, dividing the couple's jointly owned real estate would be complicated, and Phuc Va could also be required to pay support if he did not win custody of the children. With details like these, police had every reason to suspect that Phuc Va was involved in the disappearance of Miss Lee and her mother. They began reviewing his statements and immediately found contradictions. Phuc Va said he did not know where his wife's Honda Fit had been since September 6th, but investigators learned through other sources that police had found that Honda on December 5th, 2023, parked at an industrial area lot in Oakland. Even stranger, during covert surveillance, officers captured video of Phuc Va himself driving that Honda and moving it to a different parking spot on the very day he insisted he had no idea where his wife's car was. This discovery was immediately reported up the chain of command. Phuc Va officially became the #1 suspect. Even so, police did not rush in. They wanted to strengthen the case with more evidence and, if possible, locate the missing mother and daughter. Throughout December 2023 and into early January 2024, officers in San Pablo quietly monitored Phuc Va's every move. They also reviewed the suspect's phone and computer history and uncovered a series of disturbing leads from his internet searches. Specifically, on September 6th, his computer accessed searches about buying a large ice cooler big enough to fit a person. He also looked up how to remove blood from hardwood floors and how to eliminate the odor of a corpse. And it didn't stop there. Several days later, he searched Google for phrases such as Alameda Point body, and has a body been found in Alameda yet? Alameda Point is near the area where the unidentified Jane Doe was recovered. By mid-September, he searched the phrase, "Can the main suspect leave the country?" These digital traces sent chills through investigators. They suggested a meticulous plan to commit a crime and conceal a body. Around that time, the Jane Doe case in Oakland began to make progress on identification. Investigators there remembered the case of the missing Vietnamese mother and daughter in San Pablo and formed a hypothesis that the body might be Mrs. Quay Thi Chun. To verify it, they wanted a DNA sample from Mrs. Chun's biological daughter for comparison, but cruelly, Miss Lee was also missing. So police instead collected DNA from Mrs. Chun's personal belongings at the home. After several weeks of analysis, on March 26, 2024, the laboratory reported that the DNA from the body matched Mrs. Quay Thi Chun. At last, after nearly 6 months, Jane Doe's identity was revealed. It was Mrs. Quay Thi Chun, the mother-in-law Phuc Va had reported missing. Now, police could confirm that at least one of the 2 missing women had been murdered, and the last person known to have seen them was none other than Phuc Va. In February 2024, after the body of Mrs. Chun was identified and enough evidence had been gathered, police decided to move in. They quietly coordinated a plan to arrest Phuc Va as carefully as possible because the suspect was plotting to leave the United States. In fact, near the end of 2023, after sending his children to stay with their paternal grandparents, Phuc Va traveled to Vietnam for several weeks before returning to the United States. That move only strengthened police determination not to let him escape again. Before dawn on February 29, 2024, San Pablo detectives and agents silently surrounded the home on Sutter Avenue. Following their plan, they knocked on the door under the pretext of verifying additional information. The moment Phuc Va opened the door, he was swiftly restrained and handcuffed right on his own doorstep. The arrest was fast and uneventful, with no resistance. The neighbors were still asleep. No one knew that the poor widower they had pitied for so long had now been arrested on suspicion of harming his own wife and mother-in-law. Phuc Va was transported to the Martinez Detention Facility in Contra Costa County under a special arrest warrant. Although his wife's body had not yet been found, a chain of circumstantial evidence combined with forensic findings from Mrs. Quay Thi Chun's remains meant the suspect was all but certain to be denied bail. Immediately after Phuc Va was taken into custody, the investigation entered a faster and more comprehensive phase. By this point, police had determined this was a double homicide. The investigative team's initial assessment was that the motive stemmed from family conflict and financial pressure. This was further reinforced when officers later discovered that Phuc Va had purchased substantial life insurance policies for his wife and his mother-in-law, totaling approximately $500,000 USD. That made it highly likely that Phuc Va chose to eliminate his wife and mother-in-law for financial gain. To verify this theory, police conducted a full analysis of all physical evidence collected. First, regarding the blood found at Phuc Va's home, test results showed that the blood on the rolled-up rug and in the gaps beneath the floorboards matched the DNA of Thurng Ak Lee. This proved that Miss Lee had been attacked inside the house. In addition, several smaller blood traces were found behind the kitchen refrigerator and beneath the wooden flooring, matching the DNA of Mrs. Gui Thi Chun. This was extremely strong forensic evidence, completely undermining the story that the two women left voluntarily. Next, the victim's Honda Fit was also examined in detail. Police found a long strand of hair stuck in the trunk, which later testing confirmed matched Miss Lee's hair sample. Investigators also found mud and organic residue embedded in the trunk liner, consistent with the type of soil from the Alameda Riverbank area. This suggested the vehicle had been used to transport a body to the shoreline. Evidence on the wheels also indicated the car had traveled along a route near Alameda Point, a remote bayside area that Phuc Va had searched about online. Additionally, no unknown fingerprints were found inside the vehicle beyond those of Phuc Va and Miss Lee, indicating that no outside party had been involved in moving the car. As for Mrs. Gui Thi Chun's body, although it had decomposed significantly after being submerged in water for nearly 3 weeks, the medical examiner still documented a fracture to the back of her skull. This injury could have been caused by a blow from a blunt object. It is highly likely the perpetrator killed her by suffocation using his hands or struck the back of her head with a stick, then dumped her body in the water to dispose of the evidence. Meanwhile, data from Phuc Va's phone showed that he did not call or text his wife at all after September 6, 2023. That is highly abnormal, because if his wife had truly left in anger, a husband would be expected to contact her and search for her. Instead, around late September, Phuc Va was frequently in contact with a phone number with the +84 country code, meaning it was in Vietnam. Digging deeper, investigators found that number belonged to a woman in Vietnam confirmed to be Phuc Va's new fiancée. His Facebook chat history also revealed flirtatious messages with a female account featuring a youthful profile photo. He introduced himself as a fun single dad who loves nature and works hard. He even updated his Facebook status a few days after his wife disappeared, stating that he was single and looking for my other half, along with a photo of himself with his 2 children. In addition, witness statements provided more valuable information. The owner of the nail salon where Miss Lee worked said Miss Lee had abruptly stopped coming to work after September 6th without any notice. On September 7th, the salon owner called Phuc Va to ask what was going on, and he calmly said his wife had gone to Los Angeles to visit relatives. Miss Lee's close friend stated that about a week before the disappearance, Miss Lee confided that everything had become too much to endure and that she would talk about divorce after her mother's naturalization was completed. That may have been the trigger for Phuc Va's brutal decision. Because he did not want a divorce, fearing he would lose money and the house, he chose to act so he would not have to split assets and could also collect life insurance. Police carefully evaluated the reliability of these statements and cross-checked them against physical evidence. Once every piece fell into place, the full picture became clear to the investigative team. Phuc Va was the killer, and he had meticulously planned to stage the scene as a disappearance. An unforgivable crime. Based on the evidence and testimony collected, police successfully reconstructed the entire sequence of events. On September 5, 2023, the atmosphere inside the small home on Sutter Avenue grew suffocating when Thurng Ak Lee decided to speak frankly with her husband about ending the marriage and unresolved financial issues. Miss Lee confronted Phuc Va about his secret affair and about a large amount of money he had spent without discussing it with his wife. Phuc Va, already with a plan of his own, remained terrifyingly calm. He deliberately provoked her, perhaps trying to push her into extreme anger. When Miss Lee demanded a divorce, Phuc Va recognized the threat. Divorce meant he would lose half the assets, and he would no longer be free to return to Vietnam and marry his new woman. That was where the evil intent took root. Before dawn on September 6, 2023, Phuc Va decided to act. He approached Miss Lee while she was in the downstairs bedroom, then suddenly used his hands to suffocate her. Miss Lee struggled, desperately clawing at the air. During the struggle, her head was struck against the edge of a cabinet or the floor, creating bloodstains that were left at the scene. Finally, using his full body weight, Phuc Va pinned her down until she was killed. It took only a few short minutes, and then the room fell silent again in the darkness. The mother of 2 died at the hands of the man who had once vowed to love her. Phuc Va stood up, gasping for breath. Before him lay the body of his 40-year-old wife. But he had no time to panic or feel remorse. The plan was not finished. He wiped the sweat from his face, calmly wrapped Ms. Lee's body in a bedsheet and dragged it into a large freezer he had prepared in advance. The purpose was to temporarily preserve the body so he could deal with the second victim. A few hours later, at dawn, Phuc Va drove to Oakland to pick up Mrs. Quay Thi Chun. He routinely drove her to and from the house for visits, so his appearance did not raise suspicion among the nursing facility staff. Mrs. Chun happily got into her son-in-law's car, unaware of the ominous fate waiting at home. When they arrived at the house in San Pablo, Mrs. Chun stepped inside and was shocked to see signs that the rooms had been disturbed, as if something was wrong. Before she could understand what was happening, Phuc Va attacked his mother-in-law from behind. The fatal blow sent her collapsing to the floor. He then suffocated her to ensure she would not survive. Afterward, Phuc Va quickly cleaned up the scene. He wiped away Miss Lee's blood with cleaning solution and rolled up the blood-stained rug to hide it. As for Mrs. Chun's body, because there was blood on her head, he wrapped her in a blanket as well. Both bodies were then placed into the trunk of Ms. Lee's Honda Fit. Around midday on September 6th, Phuc Va drove the Honda toward the shoreline in Alameda, an isolated area with little foot traffic. There, as the tide was rising, he dragged the two bodies out one by one. Phuc Va tied additional weight to both bodies and submerged them in the water. Afterward, Phuc Va drove the Honda back. But he did not bring the car home. Trying to mislead investigators, he drove to East Oakland and found a parking spot in a quiet industrial area to abandon the vehicle. Once everything was in place, Phuc Va calmly took a taxi back to San Pablo. In the days that followed, he carried out his performance of grief. He took the children to stay with their paternal grandparents in another city, then continued going to work and living as usual for another week, also giving himself time to check whether any traces of the crime had surfaced. It was not until September 13th, 2023, that Phuc Va went to the San Pablo Police Department to report his wife and mother-in-law missing. In the weeks that followed, he even helped put up missing person flyers and gave tearful interviews to the community. No one suspected that he was acting out grief over pain he himself had caused. More than 1 year after the crime, Phuc Hong Va faced justice at the Contra Costa County Superior Court in the city of Martinez. The trial began in early 2025 and drew intense attention from the Vietnamese community in the Bay Area. Phuc Va was charged with first-degree murder for Mrs. Price, Quay Thi Chun, and second-degree murder for Tho Ngoc Lee. In court, Deputy District Attorney Mary Knox emphasized that the defendant killed his wife and mother-in-law for the $500,000 USD life insurance payout, and highlighted Phuc Va's calculated planning preparing a freezer, weights, and cleaning the scene. On the other side, defense attorney Paul Feuerwerker argued that the defendant did not confess and that no witnesses saw what happened to the victims. Put simply, he claimed the case lacked direct evidence. And among those testifying, no one truly knew what the marriage between the couple was like behind closed doors. Over the course of the trial, prosecutors presented each piece of evidence they had collected, including CCTV footage showing Phuc Va driving his wife's car, blood samples in the home matching the victim's DNA, and the DNA from the body recovered in Oakland Bay matching Mrs. Quay Thi Chun. The defendant's disturbing internet search history was also presented, sparking public alarm. In addition, the mystery of Michelle was finally solved. She was a co-worker of Ms. Lee at the nail salon and a former police officer. Suspicious of Phuc Va's behavior, she had made the anonymous call to law enforcement. Facing this key witness, the defense struggled. The attorney tried to cast doubt on several pieces of evidence, repeatedly focused on the fact that Miss Lee's body had never been found, and attempted to suggest that someone else might have harmed Mrs. Chun. The defense also emphasized the defendant's right to remain silent, arguing there was no confession and that everything was being heard from only one side. But to the jury, this backfired. Many saw the silence as simply, "It's so obvious there's nothing left to say." After roughly 2 weeks of testimony and arguments, the case went to the jury for deliberation. The 12 jurors deliberated for about 1 day. By the afternoon of February 18th, 2025, they reached a unanimous verdict that the defendant was guilty. In April 2025, Judge Charles Birch formally delivered the sentence. Phuc Hong Va was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Many people felt satisfied, believing it was a fitting ending for a deceitful husband who had played the victim. With the trial concluded, Phuc Hong Va became a prisoner for life. Justice delivered a definitive answer in this case. However, Tho Ngoc Lee's body was never found. So what do you think? Do you believe there are still unanswered questions in this case? Let Vietnamese Case Files know in the comments. And if you found today's story compelling, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you can continue following more gripping stories in the future. Goodbye, and see you next time.